Gentlemen, how are you doing?
Great.
I want to start by saying thank you so much for joining me today to talk about your fantastic movie. I have a lot of questions about the film, but I always like throwing some curveballs at the beginning to mix it up a little bit. So, Terence, I'm going to start with you. If you could get the financing for any project that you want to make, what would you make and why?
Wow.
Well, it would be the next film, which is called The Post Office Girl. It is written by Stefan Zweig, a great Austrian novelist who wrote the novella Letter from an Unknown Woman, from which Ophuls made that fabulous film in 1949. I want to do that because I think it's a wonderful book, which he never actually finished. He tinkered with it until he and his wife killed themselves in Rio de Janeiro in the mid-30s. But it's a wonderful novel because it's a Cinderella story with an unhappy ending. It's knockout.
It's interesting you say that because I love movies that do the unconventional ending or do things that you're not expecting. Is that what sort of is drawing you to it? The fact that it has that unconventional ending?
No, the unconventional ending, I said to everyone, it's got to stay. We must not alter that. No, what drew me to it is the fact that here's this young post office girl whose they're living in Austria just after the First World War when the Austrian economy collapsed. And her aunt has gone to America and married a Dutchman. And they come back to Austria and they invite her for a fortnight. And she goes to this magical world where everybody doesn't worry about money. And at the end of it, she still would like to go home. And the final third of the film is her coming to terms with that level of despair. It's wonderful. But then I'm drawn to people, who are outsiders because I'm an outsider myself. I don't participate in life. I'm a non-participant. And the trouble with being a non-participant is you usually get ignored.
Well, first of all, I love the answer. So I'm curious, and I hope you get to make that project. I'm curious for both of you guys. What do you think would surprise, for Terence, what do you think would surprise people to learn about being a director in the entertainment industry? And Jack, what do you think might surprise people to learn about being an actor?
What would surprise people about being an actor? I don't think a lot would surprise people, to be honest. I really don't. It's a very hard question to answer when you've been an actor your whole life. So, I mean, there is deep set insecurity that just follows you around like Churchill's black dog constantly. I'm not entirely sure. What would surprise people about being?
Do you always feel like you're not going to book another gig after you wrap on something, or have you gotten past that?
No. I'm almost at the stage where I'm sort of like, oh my God, am I going to book another one? Please, no, not yet, because I'm still recovering from the last one. It does because it does take it out of you. It really does. But I think the sort of it's an incredibly lonely profession. It sort of is portrayed as if you're sort of always surrounded by the fantastic people all the time, and you're on yachts and things like that. But it is quite a lonely profession because at one point you're in a hotel room and then you go to set and then that entire machine just turns around and looks only at you, and everything that's been worked on for maybe years and imagined and envisaged and paid for is then thrown completely onto you, which is a pressure that a lot of people have very, very different ways of managing. But it can be a very lonely place because you are your art, you are the product, you're the final thing, you are what you do. You are not a carpenter where you can make a table and then stand back and people look at the table. You're the table, and so it's tough, but it can be wonderful as well.
That's a great answer. Thank you for sharing.
No problem.
And Terence?
What would people take from it? Poverty. Good, when you're not in the mainstream, you struggle for money all the time. And I'm still struggling for money, literally. And that's no fun. At 75, I didn't think I'd be in a position where, I'm in huge amounts of debt. I don't make films that are popular and mainstream. It took 6 years for Benediction to get to the screen. Anyone with any sense wouldn't do it. Anyone with any sense would just go down the popular route and make Jane Austen films. Again and again and again.
Yeah, I am happy that you make movies. I'm happy that you make the movies that you make. And let's talk about Benediction, because you did such a great job with this material. For people that are not familiar with it yet, how have you been describing it? Because I hate asking that generic question, but no one will have seen it yet.
Well, it's about Siegfried Sassoon, who was one of the 3 great war poets of the First World War. In fact, we were the only, of all the combatants, we were the only ones who produced 3 great poets. The French had composers like Ravel. But it's not just about the First World War. The First World War is important because it actually forged him into a great poet. But it's about other things too. Making wrong decisions. This man falls in love with the wrong people all the time. And the people he really does love, he never consummates it. And this constant journey towards some kind of resolution, some kind of peace of mind, if you like, doesn't come. But of course, that's what makes it interesting. That's what makes it interesting.
Jack, you are extremely good in this role, and there's a lot for you to chew on in terms of there's just a lot to this role. And I'm curious, how do you get ready for something like this? And has your process for getting ready for a role adjusted now that you've worked a lot more, if you know what I mean?
It's my process. I don't have one. I just don't. I seek to have one. I long to have one. I long to have something that I know I can just, like a jacket, just stick it on before I go in, and it fits so perfectly, and I will be forever, infinitely prepared for any role. To me, the prep is the thing that will be a lifelong pursuit of how to prep in the best way for a role, because I haven't worked that out. And I've tried different jackets on in terms of prep again and again and again, because it's once you're on set and once you're surrounded by phenomenal people, when you have the script and everything there, you're given a lot of help, obviously. But when you're alone, that's to me is the hardest part of being an actor, is before you're on set. It's the hardest part, because it's a discipline that very few people have managed to sort of nail down a very specific way to do it. And it can be lost in a lot of crap that people speak and books that people have written. It's a very, very personal thing. And to me, I would like to keep acting in this pure pursuit of finding the best way to prep, because I would because it's the prep that takes you away from your personal life. It's those moments where you're sat worrying, oh God, maybe that isn't the right way to think of this, and it's but as soon as you walk on set, it's sort of almost irrelevant, which you just forget every time you start a new project. But in terms of Siegfried, the reason this job was a little bit easier was because of the script, was because it's one of the best scripts I've ever read. And maybe that's because I could relate to a lot of what he felt. But it was a lot easier with this, because you had such a brilliant blueprint, and quite often you really don't have a good blueprint.
I think one of the things that the film does so well, one of the many things, is that it feels like it's accurately portraying what it was like for people that were gay, a long time ago, 100 years ago, or give or take 100 years ago. And one of the things is the fact that like affection could only be a handshake, basically, in public. And there's like a scene where, anyway, I thought that was very good. Can you both sort of talk about how difficult it was for people in those kinds of in those kind of relationships back then, and just what the world, you know what I mean? Hopefully, I said that right.
But you must remember they come from the upper class, so they could get away with it, because they knew the right people. I mean, Stephen Tennant was almost like a woman. He dressed like a woman and was extremely effeminate. So if you had the right connections, it was okay. But if you were in the lower middle class or working class, you went to prison. They're cushioned by that privilege, which is something that I personally don't like. But it was very often, I don't know, I was going to say something which I don't believe in. No, I think it was still difficult. Obviously, one can't take away that difficulty, but they were cushioned and protected by their privilege. They just were.
I guess also when you're performing and on stage and you are making people money, I think that probably helps.
Well, if the film makes money.
No, I meant back then with some of the people in the film, but yes, I know what you're saying.
No, it's a particular class of people.
Yeah.
And it's the upper class.
I don't know if you want to add anything, Jack, or I can move on.
No, I did. That was the thing that stuck out to me was I think a lot of people are probably going to take that element away about his story, but that was fairly evident fairly quickly that, as Terence says, you were dealing with people of a certain class with a lot of money and weight and power and connections, that probably the outcomes of living as either privately or openly gay were nowhere near as severe as they could have been to those in the lower classes, which is a thing that back then was one of the great blights of the United Kingdom, was the class system, which is still eating away at us constantly. So no, it played a part of Sassoon's story in this film, but it's definitely not everything that the story's about. It's secondary to his regret, and as Terence would say, is his seeking for redemption, really.
Terence, you use old footage in the movie, and you splice it in to help tell the story. Where did that idea come from?
Well, very simple. Even if you had billions and billions and billions of dollars, you cannot recreate what it was like in the trenches. You just can't. And I saw that footage, and it's deeply moving, horrific, and some of it's extremely beautiful. And the other cliche is that in a lot of films about the First World War, there's this wonderful long Edwardian summer where everything is so beautiful and exquisite. Yeah, if you're of the right privileged background, if you were working in a factory or down a mine, it wasn't. So I wanted to avoid that cliche. So I thought I will make the interiors sumptuous, so that when you see that footage, that's what they're going to, and that's what they come back from. That was absolutely it, and the difficulty was of choosing the footage, because there's so much of it which is appalling. It's appalling, but it is mesmeric.
I'm basically out of time with you guys, but just real fast, I want to ask one last thing. One of the things that's interesting about Siegfried is that he is, and Jack, you touched on it, he's always looking for this sort of redemption. Can you sort of talk about that aspect of the film and of him?
Well, that's where I identified with him very well, and very easily. I read his memoirs before I read his poetry, and his memoirs are, to me, almost more revealing, and my favorite part of his writing. That's just personally. His hypocrisy and his recognition of his own hypocrisy is, for me, the most endearing thing about him, and it's something that in a time and an age of where everybody has to right now, you know, put their flag in the ground and stand for and cry and burn and die for one thing that they believe in, and must never ever think something else, must never ever change their mind. That was the most refreshing thing for me, was to look at a man who quite openly, even though in his memoirs, but I imagine he was probably like that in his private, in public with his friends, is not afraid to say that I think this, but I'll probably think that in the morning. And I think those are where the really interesting discussions are, and where great art comes from, obviously. So that for me was one of the main lines in him that I just absolutely fell in love with, because we don't see it that often anymore. People who contradict themselves all the time.
Yeah, brutal honesty is rare.
Yeah, and the ability to wake up in the morning and go, you know what, actually, I think what I've believed in for 10, 15 years is completely and deeply flawed. And that is one of the great engines of change is hypocrisy sometimes. Yeah.
I have to stop there. I'm just going to say congratulations on the movie. I really hope it's a huge hit for you guys. And Terence, I really hope you are making another movie sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cool.
Thanks, man.
Good luck with the rest of your interviews, and have a great day.
Okay, you
Thanks,
too.
Steve.
Thanks.
Steve.